push, push. Don't stop pushing. Set. Push, push. Stay smooth up top, straight down.
Alright, so this is a review of the sprints that we did on Friday at 9:30. Shout out to Grant for filming and Josh for starting. Okay, so this first one we're going to do Zoot and Taylor. Just because it'll get covered up, yours will come later. Don't worry, it's coming in there. Alright, so when we come up to set, everything is looking pretty good across the board. Taylor maybe a touch high if it's impeding you from kind of pushing out a little bit. I'm not going to say bring the really bring the hips down, but this might be a touch high. Zoot looking pretty good, and Aaliyah honestly not too bad as we're sitting in there. As we go to push, Taylor very well done of not, so I'm just hitting like the frame right here. You are not doing what you did last year of resetting these feet every time you go to push. Something that might improve this position, maybe moving your blocks back a touch. I don't know. We can play around with that a little bit. But as we come out through our first step and we push through, this Taylor is where we got to have the hips come through. Okay, you are leaning down so far, almost for the fact of just to lean down. Okay, very flat back here, which is good to push out, but then when we come to our full stance phase and our full push off, so take off of this foot, there's such a big broken line from the thigh to the hips this way to the back this way. Pushing those hips through will help them move forward more, and you'll get a much bigger first step there. Otherwise, as it comes through with that foot coming through and then coming back down, pretty good all the way around. Very, very good at stopping that thigh and now pushing backwards down into the ground. You may be a touch in front of the hips, but again, if you can push the hips underneath, that won't be a problem anymore. And then as we go to the second step is where that lack of hip push is really, really evident. So if you watch how much your left leg pushes into the track here, it almost just looks like it stops pushing for half a second there. Get those hips underneath and move that forward so we can get a bigger distance. That between those two steps is maybe 4 feet right here. We need to try to push that to like 5.5. And that only happens, it doesn't happen by reaching, because you still want to be able to get this shin angle negative and pushing back, by pushing the hips forward and having the entire body travel in a horizontal direction first. Okay? But again, outside of those couple things, hip shifting forward, not doing too bad. Okay? Looks really good for first couple times coming out. And then as we get further down the track and we start actually getting up tall for sprinting, a couple things. As this shin starts going straight down, we need the shin angle to match the chest angle. Okay? Shin needs to match the spine. S and S, shin and spine. So as your hips start coming underneath you and these eyes start coming up, which they should still be down through about that 10-meter mark, those yellow cones, as those eyes start coming up, that chest also needs to come up. Because now you're creating this huge curve between the chest here, the back here, and then as we go to step down, now there's just a big break in the chain right there. Okay. Keep those eyes down, or when they come up, push the hips out, get the chest up, tuck the glutes in. Now we're running over wickets. Now we're up nice and tall. We can put force down into the ground that way. Okay. All right, Zoot. Same thing about the hips. I think we talked about this on Friday too. Really good with that first right, coming down and back, and then we just got to work on that left. So as that left cycles through, we don't want to force the toe drag just to have the toe drag, but that heel should come as low to the ground as possible, to be able to come forward and straight back down. Now as that right comes through, you do a pretty good job there of pushing it down and back, but could we have gotten a little bit more powerful step off of that right and a little bit faster step on getting it back down to the ground if it would have been brought straight through and then back down again. And then same thing as Taylor, once we get up and running and the legs start cycling around and they start moving, shin angle needs to match on touchdown. So like this portion doesn't matter because we're in the air, but shin angle on touchdown needs to match the chest. Okay, and we're like a little bit in between frames here, but it's good enough for us four. Keep that chest moving up as the foot here starts cycling out. So now we are touching down straight away. Shin is vertical, chest is not. Okay, and then you move it through as it goes forward. Shin angle and chest need to stay the same. So how often can you keep the shin going backwards on every single step? So it sits in the first one here, second one here, third one here, fourth one here, fifth one here, sixth one here, seventh one here, eighth one here, and now we're up tall. Now you can bring it out to like 16, 20 steps, beside the point. Let it slowly move up, and don't be afraid of that backwards motion on every single step, which is going to keep you in line and keep you moving horizontally further versus trying to quote-unquote get up to speed right away. Outside of that, as it goes to top-end mechanics, you're not looking too bad overall. Yeah, Taylor, we're a touch in front of the hips, so bring those, and now we're at the end of acceleration, so it's not exact. But yeah, outside of that, you two are looking pretty good. So then this one was good. This one will be, I think it's Cody, mostly Cody, yeah, because Brayden, you get covered up. So something you're doing really well that we weren't doing well last year was this initial movement out of the blocks. Your arms and your left leg move together, and you get a really good push off of that right, and now we're actually gaining ground on that left. Before, that left was sitting maybe behind the line, so we were getting nothing out of it. Now as we go through this triple extension, you're getting out of the back of the hips. It's the whole triple extension thing is we need it, yes, but if you, which you're not, but just as a frame of reference, if you sit in this position and you feel this hip flexor stretch, then you have been there for too long. Okay, now if you look, as soon as you get that push off, that left starts coming down, and then we move into that right again. And then the same thing as that right comes up, that left comes up again. Come inside a little bit as you start like pushing this foot around and through, but that's just how your hips are oscillating. Not that big of a deal as long as you can work with it. The biggest thing with yours, again, would be that chest angle, same as the girls. As the foot comes through, you're doing a really good well of still having a negative pushback. That left swings forward, it drops, and then when it lands, it's pretty dang close under the hips, maybe a little bit in front. But on touchdown, again, you're all, so this is the one you're in between two frames here, so whatever. But on touchdown, we need this foot or the shin right there to match the back. Okay, so we either bring the back down a little bit or bring the hips underneath to push the chest up. And that's just going to help you with matching that foot angle there, so that's a little bit better one. You're pretty much at ground contact. This one you're already pushing through. Oh, you're still just in front of the hips as we go into the next step. And then as we start cycling through, we just don't stop pushing, and now we're up and away. But as the arms and as you keep pushing past, this is roughly 13-ish, 10-ish meters. As you keep pushing, don't lose those arms. Keep those all the way up, all the way through. Okay. This one is Aaliyah and Lizzie. So Lizzie, you kind of find the middle ground between you and Taylor. Taylor's up really high. You're not really quite up that much. Maybe a little bit more would help. Again, you were kind of feeling a little iffy in the blocks. But as we look through your first couple pushes, I can kind of start to see why. So, pretty dang good push out. If you're going to be worried about stabilization within this position, if this left arm comes up a little bit more and is about even with your head, so that same line pushes all the way through the shoulder with your hand up here, that might help with some stabilization, a little bit more power. Really good right as it pushes out, drops, and comes underneath. You're a little bit in front of the hips, but that's okay. It's not great, but for now it's fine. And same thing, push those hips underneath, but this is where you start to get off, which is what we were doing last year. That really, really, really big cycle in the back as it swings through, and it has to physically stop itself from swinging. So Aaliyah, this kind of relates to what we were talking about Friday. You have to stop the swinging within that knee and then redirect it down. Now you're really, really in front of the hips here. Okay. And then as that right then comes along, if you can see how your hips have to turn inside to get that left foot to whip out and then down, which is kind of where that like left and right swiveling comes in. Excuse me. Same thing. Straight out. Here you can really see that the hips don't follow that push at all. And so when that foot tries to come down and back, it simply can only go down. And so this is where this is perfect on touchdown, super, super in front of the hips. One of two things can happen. We either shorten up your steps or we elongate the hip movement forward and actually get this to travel forward more to get over top of those feet. Think like the very top part of a deadlift where you have to open up the back, squeeze the glutes, and push the hips through, or any kind of hip thrusting movement or anything like that where the hips have to push. That is the last part of your takeoff phase within this point here. Okay? Good push, good push, good push, but the hips got to follow through so that those feet can come down and back. And now we get into something like this. Okay? So before, this is step 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, pretty much step 4. That shin is straight up and down. Okay, shin is straight up and down. Hips are, by anatomy, hips are turned out, but the shin is straight up and down. Your chest is not. Okay, so you're now forcing yourself down as your body is going to be forcing it to stand up. So you're just working against itself here. And then as you then go to push off, good post position, but then same thing as that right goes to step down. It does have a little bit of backward motion, so we're not losing everything there, but super, super in front of the hips, which means we can't be pushing right now. We're kind of half pulling, half pushing. Aaliyah, same thing. And then upon touchdown, which is right here, shin angle is that, chest angle is not that. Chest is here, between shoulders to hips. So again, we have to match both of those the best that we can. And then from here on, you're just using just straight muscle and power and trying to push yourself down the track. What we have to try to do is get as much force into the ground within here and here. Those are your two frames, if you want to call it that, of time and contact to be able to put force into the ground. In the acceleration phase, because of just physics, you are going to be on the ground longer and pushing behind you here, and you're going to be pushing off the ground the entire time that way. But that is only relative to the shin angle and the force output angle. So as the shin starts going straight down, we want to get as much force as early as possible. We do not want to continue pushing out this way, because what that is going to do, Josh, is that is going to keep you on the ground forever, and then you are going to have to then, as you're pushing, Move the hips forward, set the foot down, and that is where your very first movement within those two frames is not to flex the hip. The very first movement was to flex the knee and bring the heel up. Now you do a really good job of pulling that knee forward after you bring it up, but now again, this isn't top end sprinting, so it's a little bit less transferable, but knees together a touchdown. Now again, because we are accelerating, the foot's going to be a little bit farther in front of this one, yada yada, but because the shin angle is vertical, this is what we have to happen. If we can keep the shin angle going a little bit forward, now we can get away from some of this and we can still stay in our acceleration mechanics that we were at back here. Yep, and that's why as a whole it looks a little wild, but we're able to work with it. Now something very interesting happens within about these 4 frames. Eyes are down, eyes are straight ahead, and then the chin aggressively pops underneath. Straight ahead. Now this could be just the way that the things are looking at this, but it almost looks like you throw that chin up from underneath. Yeah, that's something else to be aware of. All right, Aaliyah. Oh, we went too far. No? Yeah, this one is Aaliyah. Okay. And we kind of talked about this on Friday too, but you don't have to just think about what we do off of step 1. Push those hips underneath would be greatly helpful. Very, very helpful to get the power, behind that you need. Wow, this is getting a little shaky. But we also need those hips. You just gotta push underneath. Because now, what power do you have pushing down? The glutes are not there, so you're just relying on, so foot's underneath the hips, good. But you're just relying on the quads. That is it. We're not using the glutes or the posterior chain, glutes, erectors, anything like that. We're just using the quads and the calves. So that's why we got to push the hips underneath. Then, that left cycles back up and down, or up and around, and that is what was leading into when we were talking on Friday of what to do after step 1. So step 1 comes through. After 1, push off of 1, not too bad overall, just this position in general. But then as we get into step 2, what does the foot have to do? Extend and go straight down. There was no backward movement at all. The movement is straight down. Now the shin is still slightly inclined, so you're going to get the forward momentum off of that in a push versus a pulling situation. But still, per the direction it had to take, you are still now having to overcome braking forces by moving that foot forward, having to readjust and move it backwards again. And then as that right comes along around, it'll be the same thing as before. Again, it just comes straight down. There's very little backwards motion until that knee rolls over the foot. Then we can push forward. And then by about step, same thing. We're sitting here at about 4, and then by 5 we are straight up and down. And this is where we have to move those knees forward and then feet back. Knees forward, feet back, knees forward, feet back, to create that horizontal momentum to wait on this position. We have to get here eventually. We just have to get here naturally, and we cannot force this chest angle to be in non-congruence with this shin. Okay. There we go. This would be Braden and Snow, just because Braden got covered up on the last one. Okay, so one thing is going to be before this. One thing that I want to get is that your, there you go, this part. Put that in a little sooner. The little check here of going up, put it in a little bit sooner. You might get called on that if it's too late within your routine. I'm not saying set it, like, get it way too soon. As soon as you get in, get up, but get it in a little bit sooner. It shouldn't be the last thing you're doing. It should happen, and it should go up, come down, and then you do your little shakes and get yourself set based on where everything is set in here. Okay, so a little bit sooner on that. But as we go and push out, Very, very good distance. Very, very powerful going through. Better on actually getting the foot out there. And then as we come through, we're starting to look a little bit better with that low heel. Big push, straight back down. Big push, straight back down. Now, something that's interesting, this is more of an anatomy thing versus probably a preference something. But if you look at how your feet turn out, my right one's pretty forward, but if you can look at your hips, they swivel out a ton to get that foot set straight down that way. Not good, not bad, it just is. Some of that is just based on probably how your knee and your hip are just situated within your body, but that does mean we're using a ton of internal abductors within the inside thigh to then push here versus getting that foot forward and using all quad and glute to push versus kind of like using the inside of the quad versus the entire quad. Because then as we get into step 3, pretty good, but then off of toe off, you now have to correct this foot inside to push through, and then you recorrect it outside to then step down. More so something to be aware of. Again, if you can work within it, we kind of are efficient in our inefficiencies, but yeah, overall it's not something to be hugely worried about. Again, as we talked, better at allowing those feet to get up and around. We don't have to stay at the ground level and drag the toes the entire time. Let them come up as they naturally do. But that step there is a little bit of, it's pretty consistent throughout everything else. You're landing pretty far in front of the hips, okay? Like, pretty far in front of the hips. Just a touch under the hips, or in front, and that ones are just about on. Might be nitpicking pretty hard with this one single step, but if you look at, okay, that one goes, so that right thigh goes up, stops, and then comes down. Again, in front of the hips, but we'll work on that. This left one, up, keeps going up, and then has to be redirected down. Now this right gets up, keeps going up, and then it comes down again. More so, more so, don't get, wasted movement, essentially. Because if all we need to do is get the angle here, or again, because of the hips, a little bit underneath this way, if all we got to do is get to there, then that angle is about that guy right there. Now it means a couple either quicker steps, or again, same thing, we find a way to push the hips forward. But getting that huge extension here, we are now at overextension. It's a 90-degree angle everywhere. Just a little bit of paper. Okay, so this is 90 degrees. That is 90 here, 100%. But where is 90 in the hip? Okay, we're sitting underneath this way. So you're just over top, and there it is. You're just over top of 90 to get that foot back down to the ground, which then makes this whole angle here overextended. And that's kind of how you have to think about every step. And then once we land, now we are back closer to what a 90 would be once we hit the ground, and then against that thigh angle and hip angle this way compared to the chest. Okay. Again, nitpicking one little step, but it is something to be aware of as you go through, and then allowing your body to cycle itself naturally up as you get through. One thing about top end is don't be afraid to let, there you go, there's that inside foot again. Let your shoulders move. Okay, we don't have to be so rigid up top, because what we want, or part of what would help, is if you get a stretch reflex out of the entire abdominal, hip flexor, core, like all of this motion. So what that looks like, Use Cody as an example here. Let's see if I can find a couple good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, good enough for who it's for. So, as this, if he got his left shoulder forward a little bit more, it would kind of tighten up across the body. There we go. This left shoulder's forward, this right shoulder's back. It would tighten up this sector of the body this way, this line, right? As the toe off happens off of that left, then goes to push to that right, this stretch reflex contracts. The whole thing contracts this way. Shoots this left forward to pull this right down, and then now does the opposite effect of then stretching this side, and then it just happens, it's Xing itself the entire time. When those shoulders are so incredibly stiff and rigid and no movement is happening, then you lose the ability to have that stretch. The idea of tightening everything up here, or tightening everything up, would be to tighten up the abs, the erectors, and this whole situation in this way, but allow some small oscillation in the hips to get those big pushes down. Because as this right comes down, this left is going to have to come up. It's equal and opposite. And if you're not, then we're losing a little bit of power somewhere, because now you're having to force your body to stabilize all of that when it wants to move around. Conversely, then if you can contract the abs a little bit, and again, that whole like belt in there, lifting belt kind of an analogy, then when this stretch does happen, that stretches a lot more. So it's less about not allowing movement, and it's more allowing the movement to happen as it's needed, but not constricting it so much that it doesn't happen at all. Okay. And then we'll go, I think that one's supposed to be, then we'll go all the way back and we'll watch Anika. Okay. So, stance, get the hips up a touch. You want to be able to push out of that stance a little bit harder, and want to load that front foot a little bit more. Not by a ton, but just by a touch. But as you can see off of the guys, work with what you got. Like Brighton, get a little bit up, Cody's maybe a little bit forward, but we work with what is comfortable versus what is just quote-unquote recommended. Okay. Now, as we get into this first step, as soon as that right foot leaves that pedal, your foot's already coming up super high out of the blocks. Okay. Because then what does it have to do? It has to crash straight down this way into the ground. As soon as something moves forward, you then have to brake as the body moves across that fulcrum, okay, like the seesaw kind of thing. You have to, it has to brake as you move across, and then you have to re-accelerate every single time. That is why you want to simply go forward, and then from this position, straight back. We don't want to go forward at all and have that braking motion, okay? And then this same position as the other girls is where the hips would come underneath. Okay, push the hips through so we get those feet forward. And then, this is going to be the biggest thing, getting that left under control so that we can then thusly go forward and back and not have to worry about this downward motion here. Okay. And then part of what I wanted to get to was, now as we get into top end, same as a couple of the girls, whenever those shins are vertical, the chest should also be vertical. But if the chest is at an angle, the shin should be at an angle. So, upon touchdown, very, very far in front of the hips. That means that we are having to put our body in a position to pull itself forward over top of that foot before we can now use the posterior chain to push, and anterior chain to push into the ground and move the whole body forward. Okay, kind of like the bleacher steps that we did. Kind of like the bleacher steps where we did, where it was step in front of yourself and pull your hips forward. Not what we want. We want to move the hips over top and then push. And if we can just get the foot underneath the hips to begin with, we don't have to wait for it to move. We can just push right away. Okay. And then that is, the more that we can control those, the better that it will be. Now, as we get into your just because we're past the acceleration. It's not quite top end mechanics, but we'll call it top end mechanics. As we get past acceleration, you start really, really going. Pretty good push off or toe off position here. Okay. But as that foot lands and extends, vertical shin, still very far in front of the hips. We want that underneath, directly underneath the hips. Okay, that's where the fast leg drill and the dribbles come in. We want it to land under the hips. And then we want to allow the hips to move underneath, but not have so much of a forward chest angle that you're basically making a C in the back. It should be one big straight line on toe off, which we have more or less here. And then as soon as that toe leaves, that thigh shoots forward. Right now, the very first movement you're doing is bringing that heel up. See that? If that heel goes up first, we are now losing time for that foot to come across. And then we look at we talked about this with the football pylon. The amount of force that you can put downwards is dictated by how far your foot can travel. So if your foot can get way up here, you can put a lot more force down than if you are right there over the ground. So we need to get the foot into a better position to drop down. That means we have to return it in a different way to get it to that best position, which means we have to push off in a better position to get it to return better. And if we can't push off in a better position to get it to turn better, then that means that we had a better initial takeoff here. So one problem compounds another, compounds another, compounds another, compounds another. So everything compounds upon itself. Now we can fix some of that. We'll get there, but getting this foot down, not extended and down, as that knee here kind of extends and pushes down. We want to not extend forward, we want to push down. Knees together at touchdown, and that heel never has a chance to rise. If we can get that knee a little bit forward, and we drop straight down from here. Again, you're at the end of your acceleration phase, so it's a little iffy. But if we can get this pushing down under the hips, it will push the entire body forward. Okay. And then this last one was, Aaliyah and Lizzie. And you guys here too. Cool. Any questions, let me know.